To solve this equation, one of the first things kind of that like, careful, danger, danger, anytime you have an angle measure that is not a plane angle like x or theta, and you have 2x, 2 theta, half x, if it's not just a plane variable, then we need to do an extra step. And that extra step we're gonna do in just a second, but I want you to know up front, like that's a red flag that I have 2x right there. Okay, so I am still gonna get the trig function by itself as my first step. So I would wanna subtract over the square root of 3. But because I don't have plane x or plane theta, I'm gonna call out the ugly. You ain't got no alibi. That angle is ugly. So u is equal to 2x. And now I can rewrite my equation, and it now says tan u equals negative root 3. Now for a while, solving this equation is going to be just the same as it would have been. So since it's tangent, we are going to the unit circle, and we're looking for, one way to look at it is, where does the y coordinate divided by the x coordinate equal negative root 3? As you know, that's not my favorite. I think it's kind of slow to look at it that way. Tangent is slope. So another way to look at it is, where on the unit circle is the slope of the line that goes through the coordinate a negative square root of 3? And negative root 3, square root of 3 is over 1. So a slope of more than negative 1, well, a 45-degree angle is 1, or 45 the other way is negative 1. So we need the one that's slightly steeper than going through it the 45 degrees. And since it's negative, we're only looking at in quadrant 1, we're uphill. In quadrant 2, we're downhill. So quadrant 2, we're gonna have 1. Quadrant 3, we're uphill. Quadrant 4, we're downhill. So in quadrant 2, the 45-degree one, that's gonna be at 3 pi over 4. And then, but we need it a little bit steeper than negative 1, so it's this one. And so then that's gonna end up being at 2 pi over 3 and at 5 pi over 3. Okay, I know I'm spending a little bit of time on that, but just remember, y coordinate divided by x coordinate is negative root 3, or the slope of the lines at those spots are a little bigger than negative 1, a little steeper, and so it was a little quicker for me to find it. Okay, now what is tricky is this u substitution, is I need to right now, even though I'm solving on the interval 0 to 2 pi, I need to add on the generic one that generates all angles at this moment. So the period of tangent curves repeat every pi. So I'm gonna add on pi k such that pi is an integer, and same thing for this one, add on pi k such that k is an integer. And if we were solving an equation with cotangent, I'd do the same thing, but all the other trig functions, sine, secant, cosecant, sine, cosine, secant, cosecant, we would add on 2 pi k because their period is 2 pi. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to x, but I have a complete answer for u. So this u is gonna get replaced with 2x. So I have 2x, and then everything's the same because I'm just replacing that u. Now if I want to get x by itself, I have to multiply both sides by 1/2. And if I multiply both sides by 1/2, x will be by itself. I distribute that 1/2 through. And when you, because dividing by 2 is multiplying by half. Good, so okay, here to here. Okay, so then when I multiply through by 1/2, I end up with That 2 cancels that 2, I have pi over 3, and then 1/2 times this one is pi k over 2. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing here. So replacing the u with 2x, and bringing that down to get x by itself, multiply both sides by half. I have this, and then simplified, I have this. If we would have waited to put on the plus pi k to here, see how it wouldn't be the right answer? It has to be done up here. Okay, so now these equations generate all the angles. And the angles, normally there would only be 2 answers or 4 answers. We wouldn't have very many answers. But because of this substitution, we're going to get more answers. So how do we get those answers from 0 to 2 pi? Well, what we want to do is we're going to use this equation, and k is my integers. Now if I substitute in -1 into this, I'm going to have pi over 2 minus pi over 2. And so pi over 3 minus pi over 2 is a negative number, and that's not on 0 to 2 pi. So plugging in -1 does not give me an answer from 0 to 2 pi. Now we can come back later if you get stuck and you don't know how to simplify your fractions. We can talk about that a little bit. But I'm going to plug in 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Technically I am plugging in -1, -2, -3 as well. It's just that when I plug in -1, I get a negative answer. And my answers are only on 0 to 2 pi. Okay, so then if I plug in 0, I'm adding pi times 0 over 2. So I'm adding just 0, so I get pi over 3. If I plug in 1, pi times 1 over 2 is pi over 2. And so pi over 3 plus pi over 2 is like 1/3 plus 1/2 pi. And I get 5 pi over 6. Again, if you don't know how to add pi over 3 plus pi over 2, we can talk about that in a second. But we get a common denominator of 6 and add them together. Okay, then I plug in 2, I plug in 3, I plug in 4, I keep plugging them in. And so here are the answers that I would get. Now the reason I put this last one in gray is because 11 divided by 6 is still smaller than 2. But 7 divided by 3 is bigger than 2. So this is the first time that plugging in this number gives me a number bigger than 2 pi. So this one is not an answer. So here are my angle measures so far. Now I need to also substitute -1, -2, -3, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 into this one and see what angle measures it generates. But to save some time on just understanding how to do it, I chose one that if I were to start substituting in, let's say I plug in -1, if I plug in -1, I'm going to end up getting an answer, what is that, -1? I'm going to end up getting 1, 2, just kind of lost my train of thought, 3, 2 pi over 6, and 2 pi over 6 simplifies to pi over 3. So plugging -1 into this one gives me pi over 3. If I plug in -2, I'm going to get something smaller than 0, so that doesn't work. Then if I plug in 0 into this, I get 5 pi over 6. If I plug in 2, I'm going to get another one of these angles. Every single number I plug into this that is an integer gives me duplicates. But if you plug in these numbers into both of these, technically, all the answers that you get that are between 0 and 2 pi are your answer. But I didn't have to do that because this one is going to generate duplicates. So those are all my answers.